there once lived a little old woman who so longed to have a child to call her own. One sunny afternoon she decided to pay her friend the wizard a visit. When she arrived and told him her wish, he placed a barley seed in her hand.
I'll give you a seed. Plant it and see what happens. It will grow strong with love.
And so the old lady took the barley corn seed home and planted it in a pot full of rich soil, and placed it upon her windowsill. There she cared for it and anxiously watched it grow and grow. Then one day a beautiful flower bloomed. Within its petals a very tiny girl slept. Slowly she awoke. Yawning, she stood on slender legs.
Oh, how beautiful. Bloomed from a barley seed, such a tiny girl.
Hello, Mother.
I'll name you Thumbelina. You're as graceful as a ballerina, no taller than my thumb. You are my child. It does not matter from whence you come.
And so the old woman cared for Thumbelina as if she was her own. She clothed her, fed her, sheltered her, and loved her immensely. One day, during an afternoon walk back from the nearby village, a frog spotted Thumbelina and the old woman resting beneath a great oak tree. He fell in love with Thumbelina and vowed to make her his wife.
Oh man, look out there. She's so beautiful. I will make her mine. This I swear, for all time.
Later that night, while Thumbelina was tucked in tight, and the stars gave off a twinkling light, the frog snuck in, so quick and quiet, he tiptoed towards Thumbelina, careful not to awaken her.
My little bijou, so many, so tiny. Tomorrow night we shall marry.
Quickly he snapped her nutshell closed, and stole her away from safety of her mother's cottage. Dragging her behind, he hopped towards his home by the creek. The next morning, Thumbelina awoke startled. She had no idea where she was. She was alone in the middle of a lily pad, floating in the middle of the stream. She walked to the edge and peered off the side, searching for a way to the shore. Upon finding none, she fell to her knees, letting a few tears roll down her face. Just then, the frog appeared along the shoreline, lifting Thumbelina's spirits. He hopped to the lily pad and explained to Thumbelina her plans to marry her. Shocked, Thumbelina declined, but the stubborn frog would not take no for an answer, and hopped back to shore to find her a wedding dress. Once again leaving Thumbelina alone on the lily pad, feeling afraid, Thumbelina cried for help.
Stranded, helpless, high and dry, shipwrecked. If I am not freed, what am I to expect?
A fish had been swimming by, stopped and heard Thumbelina's cry. Feeling sorry for the poor Thumbelina, she gnawed at the vine, allowing the lily pad to float down the creek upon the subtle current. Thumbelina enjoyed relaxing flow of water around her, but the current soon picked up, knocking Thumbelina to her butt. The river current proved to be quite a ride, thrashing Thumbelina all about. But this was not the biggest of Thumbelina's problems, for ahead there was a massive waterfall. Thumbelina let out a shrill squeak. She thought for sure that she would die and covered her eyes. Right as she reached the raging waters, a beetle flew in and rescued her. He lifted her up and away. Thumbelina became dizzy from the beetle's sloppy flying and held on for dear life. Soon they landed on a patch of ground surrounded by great big trees.
She whined. Why would anyone leave such a lovely creature behind? I think I will show you off to my friends. They'll give such good comments.
And so the beetle took her to his hole, preparing her for his friend's heedful inspection. When his friends arrived and took a look at what the beetle had been raving about, they laughed.
What is this? It's certainly not like any bug I've seen. It's so ugly I don't even know why you boast it. This is most unforeseen.
They laughed and laughed and laughed, making the beetle feel stupid for ever thinking Thumbelina was even remotely pretty. The beetle grabbed Thumbelina and flew her away from his hovel, dropping her in the woods, leaving her there. Thumbelina, feeling unwanted and hideous, curled up and cried. She cried for her mother and for her old life. She cried for the warmth of the cottage and the hot food her mother made to fill her belly. Thumbelina laid there crying for a while until she fell asleep. Later that evening, her tummy gave a rumble, awakening her. But she was no longer on the messy, uncomfortable ground of the woods, but in a small bed nestled in a warm, dark room. Thumbelina looked around, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness, and noticed a bit of light spilling from the bottom of a closed door. Quietly, she removed the blanket and walked towards the door, gingerly opening it. A fire near the far corner lifted lit up the room. The walls, the ceiling, and the floor were made of dirt, and in the middle of the room there was a field mouse idly sitting in a little rocking chair.
Hello, my dear. My name is Miss Mouse. You've been asleep for a little while, but welcome to my house. You may stay as long as you like, but first you should meet my neighbor, Mr. Mole. He lives next door in a little hole. He has such a gentle soul.
Thumbelina was introduced to Mr. Mole, and indeed had a very gentle soul. She stayed with the mouse for a while, reading to Mr. Mole in the evenings before they ate a steaming bowl of Mrs. Mouse's porridge. One day she was reading of a beautiful young girl falling in love with a prince.
Magic, dress, carriage, carriage, the ball, the prince, music, dancing, dancing, midnight, run away, lose slipper, lose magic, cry, go home, wait, prince searches, slipper fits, happy ever after.
After Thumbelina finished, she put down the book and started for Mrs. Mouse's house, but Mr. Mole stopped her, taking her hand.
My dear, you entertain and keep me company. Your voice is indeed lovely. Marry me.
Thumbelina stood astounded, for she most definitely did not want to marry the old mole. She did not love him. In fact, she was barely able to tolerate coming over to his house every day, alone. She had done it for her dear friend Mrs. Mouse, who had asked so nicely. Thumbelina hadn't wanted to be so worthless as not to be able to read a few books to Mr. Mole in the evenings. But she did not anticipate the mole asking for her hand in marriage, especially not in such a forward manner for the kind mole that appeared to be so timid and shy. Thumbelina tried as kindly as she could to turn him down, but he ended up just taking it as a timid response of feelings she feared and asked Mrs. Mouse for help persuading Thumbelina to be his blushing bride. Later that night, Mrs. Mouse indeed talked to Thumbelina as she had promised Mr. Mole.
Listen, Thumbelina, I know the mole is old, but he is kind and very rich. Marry him. Harry, he just might be. It might not be true love, but he'll pay your bills and feed you. Don't ignore me, dearie. Marry the mole.
Thumbelina listened to Mrs. Mouse with great patience as she fitted her for a wedding dress. After the porridge had cooled and the fire emblems had cooled, Thumbelina snuck out for a refreshing walk in the fresh midnight air to clean her thoughts. She walked and walked and walked. Then when she finally stopped, she cried and cried and cried. She cried because she did not love the mole. She cried because she missed her mother, and she cried because she did not want to be stuck here forever. As Thumbelina wept, she heard a faint call of distress. Following the waving voice, she stumbled upon a hurt sparrow.
Oh, Mr. Swallow, are you all right? How did your wing come to be so? It doesn't matter. Wait here. I'll be back to help upon the midnight hour.
Thumbelina rushed back to the mouse's house and grabbed medical supplies. She tried not to drop anything as she ran back, but couldn't help losing a band-aid or two. Thumbelina's face was still wet from her tears, and she knew her eyes would be as red as her wind-whipped nose and cheeks. So she kept her face as hidden as she could, trying not to look the swallow in the eye, and worked as quickly as she could. The swallow watched Thumbelina with great intent as she worked to fix his wing, and when she removed the thorn, he simply let out a quick yelp and bit his tongue.
They're as red as berries. You look very worried. There is no rain, yet your face is wet. Tell me everything that troubles you this night. I am forever in your debt, my dear.
Thumbelina could not hide her tears from the swallow any more. She told him of the mean frog, of the rude beetle, of the kind mouse, and the old mole. And when she was done, the swallow offered to take her to a place far away from the mole and the beetle and the frog, a place where she would fit in, where she would always be filled with joy and surrounded by many exotic flowers, as beautiful and vibrant as her. Thumbelina nodded and her head in silence and climbed upon the swallow's back. They soared to great heights, and unlike the beetle, the ride was very smooth. Thumbelina enjoyed herself, outstretched her arms, and giggled as she once did with her mother. As the swallow had promised, he brought her to a wonderful land, lavished with all kinds of flowers and plants. She ran through the fields of lavender and brushes of bellhop. She hopped from daisy to daisy until she came to a rest in the late afternoon. Suddenly the sunlight was dimmed as if a cloud had randomly appeared. But as Thumbelina squinted, she saw that it was no cloud blocking the sun, but a man. He floated down towards Thumbelina on extravagant wings. Thumbelina gawked at the sheer delicacy of his wings in contrast to his otherwise handsome features. She blushed and searched for something else to look at as he slowly approached.
Hello and welcome to the land of flowers. I am the prince of the fairylands. Come with me.
Thumbelina took the prince's hand, and he carried her to a tiny village, full of people her size. He led her to a magical palace where she was to sleep that night. The next morning, when Thumbelina awoke, she was surprised to find herself that she had a pair of lovely wings like the prince's and the townspeople. Happily, she twirled around, admiring the gift. When the prince arrived, he showed her how to fly and take care of her new wings. In the following months, Thumbelina and the prince became very close, and he eventually asked for her hand in marriage. They had a big wedding in the field where they had first met and lived happily ever after.